So, our initial idea was to use both drone and satellite technology to help in the search for Gabe Crow. Our idea was that we wanted to use that video and satellite images to basically scan the surrounding mountains where Gabe was last seen by the deputy back in 2024, feed that into our system known as Global Search, and then have the AI and algorithms process that data at scale. We're talking hundreds to thousands of acres where to do that with humans, you would need a massive team of humans. It would take a very long time, and you're likely going to see higher error rates. With technology, that can happen very quickly. So, what we would be able to do is identify the search parameter. A very basic example could be we know Gabe was wearing a red shirt when he disappeared. Well, let's search for anything red and identify that. We could also look at things like identifying any type of path that looks like it's created by a human. The sky's sort of the limit in terms of what we could do here. The challenge, though, is that the tree canopy is so darn dense, we cannot penetrate through it to get down to the ground and see what we would expect to be able to analyze. Same exact issue with the satellite images, only we had one other challenge there, and that's the exact satellite that we would want to use because of its quality was not directly over this area when Gabe disappeared. So we decided to make a little bit of a pivot, and we're okay with that because we think it's really going to help Gabe's case. It is more intrusive, especially from a cost perspective, but I really believe it's worth it. So what we're going to try to use is LiDAR scanning technology. LiDAR scans will allow us to see what the terrain looks like underneath the tree canopy. Now, that's important for a few different reasons. Likely the most important is that we want to know what the terrain looks like because that would have directly influenced Gabe's navigation if he went into the mountains or the woods. The second is that we want to be able to take that terrain data along with all other intelligence and build out predictive models. We want to be able to get to a point where we can say, if Gabe went into the mountains, his most likely path would have been this, or in this scenario, his decision would have been this. So a few challenges, but the good news is we are continuing to move forward.
A mission with purpose to find the missing using the power of social networking and cutting-edge technology. We're military veterans, technologists, scuba divers, and relentless seekers. From deep forests to sunken vehicles, from silence to signal, every clue matters. If you've ever felt the call to stand for something greater, this is your moment. This is the Find Me Project.
Hey everyone, I want to welcome you to the Find Me Project and podcast. My name is Mark. I'm your host and moderator. This is part 2, the search for missing person Gabe Crow. I want to start this episode by thanking our Guardian Angel Task Force. They are our team of volunteers who help gather open source intelligence for missing person cases. I also want to thank the community of Asheville, North Carolina, and anyone else who has helped with Gabe's case so far. We have had over 1,000 unique opportunities submitted. Those opportunities include things such as intelligence submissions, information, tips, and really just driving our mission and purpose to help find Gabe. When we first received the referral to Gabe's case, the information was limited. There was a good storyline that we could analyze and start with, but there were many pieces to the puzzle that were missing, and some of those were very important. For example, there's never been any direct evidence or piece of information that tells us, yes, there's an overwhelming possibility that Gabe did in fact go into the mountains and he traversed the woods in some way. We also don't have any type of direct evidence that tells us if he did go into the woods, where. And that's really important because as we look at building predictive modeling, if we focus our attention on the south side of the mountain, where Gabe was last seen by the deputy, and we build those models around that location, but in reality, maybe he doubled around, excuse me, and entered back in on the north side of the mountain, well, the predictive models would be very different. So, for the past uh, few weeks, our team has been gathering open source intelligence. And then we just recently had a virtual search party. And what's really great is we've been able to see our intelligence relationship mapping grow, right? So, some of the primary things that our team has been able to identify are additional social media profiles, usernames, relationships, and contacts that are very important to Gabe's missing person case. We've been able to identify location specific information, general information about Gabe's case through the intelligence flags being submitted, as well as some tips. So now we're at a point where we can take all of that information and intelligence, enter it into our advanced AI platform known as Global Search, and then have Global Search perform an extensive search within the world of IoT or Internet of Things. Surface web, deep web, dark web. What we want to do is find any data that lives out there related to Gabe and then put it in a format where we can visualize it to see if it's important to Gabe's missing person case. Now, we just made some recent enhancements and developments to our online platform, specifically on the back end, where once that process completes, we're able to visualize it in a report overview, but we're also able to have one of our digital collectives or a digital bot known as Roby read that overview in for us to kind of simplify the process. So we're going to go ahead and do that for the very first time on this episode. We've tested this a few different times in very limited form, and it worked. So I'm really hoping when we click the button here in just a moment that this all works. Now, I do want to make a special call out that in addition to what we're about to have read in, all of the information and intelligence has been gathered from the very beginning by our Guardian Angel Task Force, a community, having our global search platform perform an extensive search. All of that information and data will be compiled in a final report. And what we're able to do is provide that report over to law enforcement or respective agencies so that way they can take that information and maybe combine it with some things they're working on, and they're able to put the puzzle together. Our end goal, remember, is to find Gabe. You know, we as an organization, the Find Me Project, we don't focus on any type of cases that have malicious intent or foul play. Although, we always have to keep that in the back of our mind. Our number one focus is to find Gabe, bring resolution to his family, friends, the community. We don't care what happened. We don't care who was involved. So right now, let's go ahead and see if we can queue up this results overview.
Let's see what we can find for Gabe Crow. I have an address listed on Wrights Creek Road in Cherokee. I found 3 phone numbers linked to Gabe, along with 5 email accounts that are possibly associated with him. These contact points have been noted for any activity or clues, though so far nothing unusual stands out in their usage. Gabe's record shows a few past speeding tickets. I analyzed these infractions for patterns, such as locations and dates, but they appear to be minor, routine traffic violations. I have also compiled a list of Gabe's known contacts, friends, relatives, and acquaintances he was in touch with. One is definitely of interest. Outside that, none have provided information that definitively leads to Gabe's whereabouts. any changes in his relationships or recent communications are under review as I look for hints or motives. I analyze Gabe's social media photos to understand his state of mind and physical condition leading up to his disappearance. This analysis is quite revealing. Gabe maintained a presence on social media, and we've reviewed his posts and photos over the past few years. His posts showed a normal range of activities, sharing updates about his basket weaving craft and photos with friends and family. Importantly, there were no obvious signs of distress or alarming behavior online. His last posts didn't hint at plans to go somewhere or any grievances. They were ordinary in nature. In addition to manual review, we conducted a facial recognition search using Gabe's photos. The goal was to see if any public cameras, online images, or unknown profiles might show Gabe after the date he went missing. This search is now complete, and unfortunately it did not yield any confirmed sightings. In other words, aside from the known images and appearances he had online, we haven't found a trace of Gabe in any new photos or videos out in the world. One notable observation was that Gabe appeared to have lost weight in recent times. This raised the question, could his weight loss be a sign of drug use or some other issue? I analyzed this carefully. It's true that significant weight loss can be associated with substance abuse, especially stimulants like methamphetamine or cocaine, or even during opioid withdrawal. In Gabe's case, the evidence for this is inconclusive. I compared his appearance across multiple years of photos. In images from 2022, when he was around 25, Gabe's face and body looked healthy. His posture was upright and confident. His expressions were relaxed, and his personal style was well kept. He did not exhibit the typical hallmarks of someone deep in addiction. Gabe was last seen on January 27, 2024, in the western outskirts of Asheville. To understand what he went through, I examined the environmental and weather conditions on that day, since they would heavily influence both Gabe's experience and the success of search efforts later. Here's what we found for that date. The day was cold, wet, and foggy. There was steady rain throughout January 27th, totaling about 1.10 inches of rainfall. This wasn't a light drizzle, it was substantial rain that persisted, accompanied by mist and fog. Such weather would have reduced visibility and drenched the terrain. The temperature ranged roughly from 44 degrees Fahrenheit to 54 degrees Fahrenheit. So it was cool, hovering in the mid-40s for a good portion of the day. 44 degrees Fahrenheit with rain can feel much colder, especially if one is wet or exposed to wind. The sky was overcast all day with thick clouds, meaning there was no direct sunlight. Sunset occurred at 5:53 p.m. that evening. However, because of the heavy cloud cover and fog, it likely started getting dim even before the official sunset time. By approximately 6:15 p.m., it was fully dark. The moon phase that night was a waning crescent, only about 7% illumination. And the moon set at 3:51 p.m. This means once night fell, there was no moonlight at all. The night was effectively pitch black under the cloudy, foggy skies. Given the weather, one major concern is hypothermia, a drop in core body temperature that can be life-threatening. Let's identify the hypothermia risk factors for that night and what they mean for Gabe. In such rainy, chilly weather, almost any outdoor location becomes a hypothermia risk zone if a person is not properly protected. If Gabe wandered onto open high ground, like a ridge on Spivey Mountain, he would be exposed to wind. Wind accelerates heat loss from the body. Even a gentle breeze at 45 degrees Fahrenheit can make it feel significantly colder. A ridgeline with wind and rain would quickly sap body heat. Low-lying areas might accumulate cold air and water. If he ended up in a ravine or beside a creek, he might have gotten his feet wet, or even tried crossing a stream. Wet clothing in cold air drastically increases heat loss. Water conducts heat away from the body far faster than air does. The forest might offer some initial shelter from wind, but the ground would be wet and muddy. Gabe could brush against soaked vegetation, getting his clothes wet even without rainfall directly. Under the canopy, it would be very dark and potentially confusing to navigate. If he sought shelter under a tree, it might have kept some rain off, but not all, and the dampness and cold would still be a threat. Once darkness fell, temperature tends to drop further. Every hour into the night, the likelihood of hypothermia would increase. Without movement, or if he became exhausted and sat down, his body could cool rapidly. How long could someone like Gabe survive or remain functional in those conditions? Based on human physiology and survival expertise, not very long without shelter. In wet 45 degrees Fahrenheit weather, if Gabe was moving and generating body heat, he might have staved off hypothermia for a short time. But being soaked will often lead to the first stages of hypothermia in as little as 1 to 2 hours of exposure. He would likely start shivering uncontrollably, which is a key early sign. Shivering is the body's attempt to generate heat, and it indicates core cooling. After a couple of hours, as core temperature potentially drops below 95 degrees Fahrenheit, confusion and clumsiness set in. Gabe may have become disoriented, lost coordination, and made poor decisions as hypothermia progressed. Without any way to warm up or get dry, the window for survival could be just a few hours beyond that. A healthy adult might survive a full night out in 44 degrees Fahrenheit rain, but likely in a very bad state by morning. And that's if they remain conscious. It's sadly plausible that by late night or early morning, if Gabe was still out in the open, his body could have succumbed to hypothermia. In many documented cases, people have died from exposure in similar conditions in less than 8 hours. Of course, this window can vary. Factors like his fitness, how much he kept moving, if he found any partial shelter, etc., could extend or shorten the time. But overall, the combination of wet plus cold is extremely dangerous and significantly shortens survival time. Now, let's estimate Gabe's likely movement after he was last seen, considering his physical characteristics and the terrain. Gabe is described as 5 feet 11 inches tall and about 170 pounds, an average build for a young man. He was reportedly on foot and alone. We want to deduce how far he might have gone and in what directions, which can guide search efforts. To figure this out, we consider walking speed in rough terrain and break down the possible path by distance. On flat ground, a person can walk about 3 to 4 miles per hour. However, Spivey Mountains terrain is steep, muddy, and uneven, especially in rainy conditions. In moderate hiking conditions with a backpack, people average 2 miles per hour. But for rough, elevated terrain, the average can slow to around 0.5 to 1 mile per hour. Gabe likely did not have hiking gear and was dealing with rain and darkness, so his effective pace would have been on the lower end. We'll assume roughly 1 mile per hour or even less once he left the road or daylight faded. Keep in mind, if he was hurrying initially on the road in daylight, he might have covered a bit more ground early on, but then slowed drastically after nightfall or upon entering difficult ground. Now, given those speeds, let's describe Gabe's likely movement path by distance segments. In the first mile after parting ways with the deputy, Gabe likely stayed on Starnes Cove Road or a nearby route. He had mentioned trying to get to a gas station. The logical move would be to follow the road towards the main highway. In this initial stretch, he was on paved or gravel road, which is easier walking. It was daylight around 12:30 to 1 p.m. Covering 1 mile would take 15 to 20 minutes under normal walking, maybe up to 30 minutes in rain. During this phase, he was probably moving with purpose and relatively quickly, still oriented toward finding help. As he continued beyond a mile, a few things could have happened. It's possible he became confused or changed course. If Gabe truly believed someone put something in his car, as he told the deputy, and was uneasy, he might have been looking over his shoulder or trying to avoid being followed. He might have left the main road. The area has some side paths and driveways, and also logging roads or trails on the lower slopes of Spivey Mountain. Between 1 and 2 miles out, perhaps between 1 and 3 p.m. that day, he could have veered onto a trail or into the woods, especially if he thought it was a shortcut, or if he panicked about being pursued. By the end of 2 miles, if he went off-road, he would be at the foot of Spivey Mountain's wooded area. Rain was still falling, so by now he'd be quite wet if he hadn't been already. This is when his pace would start to slow significantly. Hiking uphill through brush in rain, a mile could easily take an hour or more. At 2 to 3 miles, this distance likely corresponds to late afternoon, approaching dusk, say 3 to 5 p.m. If Gabe kept moving, within 3 miles he could potentially have climbed partway up Spivey Mountain or travelled along its base. 3 miles on foot in those conditions might have taken him 3+ hours if much of it was off-road. It's worth noting that by 2.5 or 3 miles, if he stayed on a road entirely, he might have actually reached some populated area or a crossroads. But since search efforts focused on the mountain wilderness, we suspect he did not stay on an easy path. More likely, he was wandering in the forested, hilly terrain, perhaps following a creek or ridgeline unintentionally. By the 3-mile mark, darkness is about to fall. 5 p.m. hour. Gabe would now be in serious trouble. It's getting dark, he's soaked and tired, and possibly becoming hypothermic. His ability to make good decisions and travel efficiently would deteriorate fast at this point. Beyond 3 miles, it becomes increasingly unlikely that Gabe traveled much farther than 3 or 4 miles that evening under those conditions. Once nightfall came, if he was still moving, it would have been extremely slow and labored. Every additional mile in the dark, rain-soaked wilderness is difficult. He might have stumbled, gotten injured, or simply exhausted himself. If by some extraordinary endurance he kept walking for many hours into the night, theoretically, he could cover another mile or 2 before total incapacitation. But it's also possible he didn't survive much beyond the early night due to hypothermia. The search teams later scoured several square miles of Spivey Mountain area. Given the time and physical constraints, Gabe's likely radius from the point last seen was probably within a 3-mile radius, maybe 4 at the extreme, outside of that last known location on Starnes Cove Road. That radius is still a vast, rugged area, unfortunately. Throughout this movement analysis, we should remember these are estimates. We assumed Gabe was on foot the whole time, and we factored in the harsh conditions. If he found some shelter early on, for example, if he knocked on someone's door or found an empty structure, that would change things. But there's no evidence of that so far. All signs point to him being out in the elements.
Wow, I have to say I'm actually really impressed. That worked out better than I thought it would. So I hope you enjoyed that. Just a few different call outs here. What we've been able to identify is huge. We have been able to associate a few different contact records to Gabe Crow, phone numbers, maybe a few emails. We've also been able to continue to build out the person relationship mapping overview for people that are connected to Gabe in some way, where maybe they didn't realize they had a direct connection to Gabe that could pull them into with to this case with some type of involvement. But we've been able to identify that, as well as a few other really great items here. Now, when we look at the LiDAR scans that we were able to get for the area surrounding where Gabe Crow was last seen by the deputy back in 2024, remember, this has always been the area where there's been a lot of speculation that Gabe did, in fact, go into these woods and he got lost. And that's ultimately how he became missing. 3 months after his last known contact, a very large search and rescue effort took place in these mountains with over 120 plus team members. So there's always been a lot of focus in this area. But we were able to look very closely at the LiDAR scans, and the terrain details is exactly what we were looking for. We're able to see and quantify these small details that really matter. We're able to identify, some things like runoffs, ravines. We can identify where water is located at within the mountain. All of that is really important because, again, it's going to subconsciously influence a person's navigation. They won't even realize it, but it absolutely will. So we can take those LiDAR scans along with all other intelligence that's been collected so far. Things like environmental factors, the weather, Gabe's physical characteristics, his profile, his pattern of life, the moon visibility on January 27th. All of it really does matter, because what happens is we're able to build out several different models that predict what Gabe's movement may have looked like. Now, what we try to do is get to a point where we can identify the model that has the highest accuracy rating. And when we get to that final model, what we see is that Gabe entered the woods around the location where he was last seen by the deputy, and he basically pushed in an eastward direction, getting to where the ridgeline starts. And that's about the point where he started to experience the looping effect. And ultimately, what happened is his route then carried him on that ridgeline in a northern route until he started to drift off course again, going north to northwest. And, his drift is predicted to just be a couple of degrees. But the important thing to understand is, over time, if we're looking at sort of the big scale or a longer distance, that really comes into play. So we then see Gabe make a circle back down, and basically, what he's doing is forming circles or loops. Now, we predict that he could have completed anywhere between 1 to 3 loops. The predictive model on that is a little fuzzy, but with the weather, the temperature, and all other factors, it's really believed that he likely only completed one to two loops if he went into this mountain. Now, where it gets even more interesting is when we add a few critical AOIs or areas of interest here on the map. So this very first one that you're going to see, if you're watching any of our short videos, I'm going to actually pull this open. If you're just listening to our podcast or audio content, completely fine. I'll describe this in detail. But our profilers and intelligence experts identified an area that's to the north of the search area. It's actually almost to the northern tip of where the predictive model would have shown him going. But our profilers in particular feel very confident that based upon all of the intelligence and Gabe's profile and pattern of life, that if he went into the woods, this would be the general location that we would want to search. This kind of also aligns with if he went in here, this would have likely been the point of exhaustion where he would had to have taken a break. And because of the temperatures and environment, it could have became a dangerous and deadly situation. Um, remember, we don't investigate malicious or foul play, but it's important to also understand that our profilers also feel confident that if foul play was involved, this would also be the general location, or one of the best locations, I should say, for a person to try and hide or dispose of a body. So it's very important that we keep this location, which is identified at the very northern tip of the predictive model, in close consideration with anything that we do. Now, we've also identified an area over here in the Compton area of Asheville. This is actually to the east of Spivey Mountain, but our profilers and intelligence experts have identified this as a location where Gabe may have visited, or someone that was with Gabe may have visited. There's no overwhelming intelligence or information that would suggest this for a fact. However, it is speculative that this is an area of interest where he may have frequented or visited in some way, right? So we want to call that out because if you're someone that lives in this area or you've frequented this area, maybe you have information and you don't even realize it, right? So as you listen to this, as you read this, if you're checking out our online platform, please make sure, if you have information, even if you don't think it's valuable, it very well could be. Our email is in the show notes. Please submit that over to us. You can also submit that to the Asheville Police Department. It very well could be the missing puzzle to solve this entire thing. The final AOI that I want to call out is actually over here just to the south of where the deputy made contact with Gabe, which was at the intersection of Starnes Cove Road and Yosemite Trail. This location is the location that our profilers, based upon all the information available, feel like this would be the place where if Gabe were to divert from his path and go into the woods, it would have happened in this general location. It's also believed that if malicious or foul play was involved, this could also be the point of interception. Somebody could have intercepted Gabe, physically taken him, or convinced him to come with them, maybe taking them somewhere else. So when we look at these three different locations, the interesting thing here is that we can almost utilize triangulation. And it really paints us a picture and puts us directly in that area where our predictive model has identified the most probable route that Gabe could have traveled. I'm going to zoom out just a little bit here on our map, and I want to go ahead and show the area over here in Cherokee where Gabe lived. We also have some intelligence that's been identified through our global search deep dive, which is an AOI, or area of interest for a possible acquaintance. So, again, we want to reach out to everybody that's listening to this that lives in the Cherokee, North Carolina area. If you have any information, if you've heard rumors, please submit that. Our email is in the show notes. You can remain 100% anonymous. But what happens is when you submit that, our global search system immediately takes that into consideration and can utilize machine learning to self-learn and refine the search criteria for Gabe. Sometimes we see that people are a little scared or hesitant for their safety to provide information over to law enforcement. So, we can act as that middle uh, broker type relationship where, we can receive it, even anonymous, and then provide that over and, take a look at it ourselves. So again, I just want to say thank you to our Guardian Angel Task Force, the community, everybody that's helped out. We even had some hikers and some backpackers and people that visited this area that gave us some good overview of the region. I want to thank all of our internal profilers and intelligence experts, especially Melissa, who's doing really great things out there. Thank you for all of your help with this case so far. Now, probably the biggest question that most people that are listening to this will ask is, are we going to move forward with an even greater enhanced live search party? And the answer to that as of right now is not at this time. What our profilers, intelligence experts, and basically everybody as a collective whole agrees with is that if we were to do a live search party, likely the best time to do that would be around the time that Gabe disappeared, which is at the end of January. So right now, with the tree canopy being as dense as it is, we don't feel like we would have as much value going out and really searching this area that our predictive model has identified as of yet anyways. So, we think that there is a good chance that around the January timeframe, we will put together a live search party, and we'll do that in collaboration with the community of Asheville, North Carolina. So, when the time comes, we'll make sure to push some content out there. So if you live in Asheville or the surrounding area and you want to get involved with that search party, you absolutely can come out, join us, and see what this mission and purpose is all about. Now, I think, one of the things that will obviously really enhance our capability of doing a live search party or moving in that direction is if we get any additional information or intelligence. So again, I want to urge everybody, if you have information at all, or if you continue to review some things and you come across some new data or information, please submit that on over to us. As always, make sure that if you feel like you're comfortable contacting the Asheville Police Department with information that you may have, that you do that as well. But I just want to end by saying thank you to everyone. This is such a great opportunity. We're really going into new areas here with the digital landscape, the podcast, the videos. It is certainly overwhelming to us, especially with our backgrounds. We typically work in the shadows, so getting this information out in front of people is really driving our mission and purpose. If you have any ideas or suggestions, we're always open. So send us an email, drop us a message or a DM, and let us know how we can, better things. In one of our next episodes, we're going to share some new features, some new information, a new look to our online platform that will be coming very soon. We also want to take a Q&A session. So if you have any questions at all, please submit them to us. Again, you can email them to us or DM us on one of our social platforms. And we'll go ahead and choose a few different questions and answer them. So again, thank you everybody for helping with this case, and I'll catch you on the next one.